The Cursed Winter Ritual. Welcome to tonight's tale of terror. We're going to explore one of the most shocking family secrets ever recorded. The story of the Hallowgrave family and their twisted winter tradition. In the foggy mountains of northern England, hidden between old forests and empty fields, sits a tiny village called Thornwick Hollow. This place was so cut off from the world that for hundreds of years, the people who lived there created their own strange customs. But none were as weird or as horrible as what the Hallowgrave family did. For many generations, the Hallowgraves ruled Thornwick Hollow completely. Their big house, Ravenscroft Hall, sat on top of the tallest hill. It looked down at the village like a giant eye watching everything below. Everyone said the Hallowgraves were the perfect rich family, wealthy, smart, and polite. But behind their closed doors, they did something so crazy that even now, when I read these old diary pages and letters, I can hardly believe they're real. Every year when winter solstice came, the longest night of the year when the wall between our world and other worlds grows thin, the married couples in the Hallowgrave family would meet in the great hall of Ravenscroft. There, with only family members watching, they would trade their husbands and wives. A husband would go to another man's wife, and a wife would go to another man's husband. They stayed together like this until the next winter solstice, when they would trade again. This is their story. I first heard about the Hallowgraves 3 months ago when I bought a box of old papers at an estate sale in London. The box was simply marked, Personal Papers, Northern Family 1870 to 1901. Nothing suggested the horrible things written inside. The diary belonged to Thomas Blackwood, a doctor who moved to Thornwick Hollow in the fall of 1887. Blackwood was an outsider in London's medical world. He was too interested in strange sciences and ghost stories for his fellow doctors to like him. When the job of village doctor opened up in remote Thornwick Hollow, he took it right away. He saw it as a chance to study people who lived apart from the rest of the world and their special problems. He had no idea that his biggest case would be the Hallowgrave family itself. Let me read directly from Blackwood's first entry about the family, dated November 12, 1887. Today I was called to Ravenscroft Hall for the first time. A messenger came before sunrise. A thin man with hollow cheeks who wouldn't tell me his name. He just said that Lady Hallowgrave needed a doctor and that a carriage would pick me up at noon. The trip to Ravenscroft was harder than I expected. Though you can see the house from almost anywhere in the village, it sits on top of a winding road that seems designed to confuse visitors. The old oak trees along the path block out most of the daylight. I must admit I felt more and more uneasy as we got closer. Ravenscroft Hall itself is a strange building. Parts of it go back to the 1400s, with new sections added by each generation. This created a maze-like building with mismatched wings and oddly angled hallways. I was met at the door by the butler, Mr. Finch, who was so stiff I first thought he was a statue. Lady Hallowgrave was suffering from what looked like severe nervous exhaustion. She lay in her dark bedroom with the curtains closed despite the already dim day outside. Her husband, Lord Edmund Hall, hovered by her side like a worried shadow. What struck me right away was how different they looked from each other. Lord Edmund is a strong man of about 50, with white hair and sharp eyes that seem to judge everything they see. Lady Karen, on the other hand, can't be more than 30. She has delicate features and hands so pale they looked almost see-through against her dark bed sheets. They didn't look like husband and wife, but like a hunter and his prey. As I examined Lady Karen, I noticed several strange symptoms. Her pupils were wide despite the room being dark. Her pulse was fast but weak. Most worrying were the marks on her wrists, thin parallel scratches that Lord Edmund said came from her troubled sleep. I gave her medicine and told her to rest, though I felt there was something deeper wrong with Lady Karen than just being tired. As I was getting ready to leave, she grabbed my hand with surprising strength and whispered, "The solstice is coming, doctor. Please pray for me when it arrives." Before I could ask what she meant, Lord Edmund led me from the room, promising he would call for me if his wife got worse. Blackwood's diary continues with normal details of village life for several weeks. He mentions treating various people for common sicknesses, a child with scarlet fever, an old farmer with joint pain. But his entries returned to the Hallowgraves in early December. December 7th, 1887. I have noticed something odd about how the villagers act whenever the Hallowgrave family is mentioned. They speak of Lord Edmund with respect that borders on fear, and of Lady Karen with what I can only call pity. When I asked about other family members, my landlady, Mrs. Pembroke, became clearly uncomfortable and changed the subject. It was only after sharing a few beers with the blacksmith, a straightforward fellow named Jenkins, that I learned the Hallowgrave family is bigger than I had been told. Lord Edmund has a younger brother, Sebastian, who lives in the east wing of Ravenscroft with his wife, Imogen. There is also a cousin, Victor Hallowgrave, and his wife, Eleanor, who live in the old hunting lodge on the estate grounds. They keep to themselves mostly, Jenkins told me, except at certain times of the year. When I asked him what he meant, he finished his ale and wouldn't say anything more about it. As December went on, Blackwood noticed growing tension in the village. Shopkeepers became less talkative. Mothers kept their children inside despite nice weather. And the church saw many more people coming to services. The doctor was curious, but no one would talk openly about what was causing this shared worry. His next important entry came on December 19th, just 2 days before the winter solstice. I was coming back from treating old Mr. Davies's foot pain when I ran into Sebastian Hallowgrave in the village square. Unlike his brother, Sebastian looks like a scholar, thin, bent over, with glasses that make his eyes look bigger. He was having what seemed to be an angry discussion with his wife, Imogen, a pretty woman with red hair and a determined look. They became quiet as I came near, but not before I heard Imogen say, "I can't bear it again, Sebastian. Not this year. Not with him." Sebastian noticed me and nodded stiffly before taking his wife's arm and leading her to their waiting carriage. As they left, I saw Lady Karen watching from the window of the hat shop. Our eyes met briefly, and the look of hopeless despair on her face stayed with me all the way home. The winter solstice of 1887 fell on December 21st. Blackwood's entry for this date is much longer than his others, and his usually neat handwriting becomes shakier as the story goes on. The village is strangely quiet today. Many homes have their shutters closed despite the clear weather. When I asked Mrs. Pembroke about this, she told me that most families observe a day of thinking on the solstice. "It's an old custom," she said vaguely. "Best to stay inside after sunset." She then pressed a small bundle of dried herbs into my hand, rowan and St. John's wort tied with red thread. "Keep this above your door tonight, doctor, for protection." I thanked her more to ease her obvious worry than out of any belief in folk remedies. However, the atmosphere of unease has affected even my scientific mind, and I admit I hung the charm as she suggested. At about 4 o'clock, as the early winter darkness began to fall, I saw a line of 3 carriages making their way up the road to Ravenscroft Hall. The vehicles were identical, black with the Hallowgrave coat of arms on the doors, each pulled by a pair of matching gray horses. My curiosity got the better of my manners. I decided to follow at a safe distance, telling myself that Lady Karen might need medical attention given her earlier condition. The gates to Ravenscroft stood open, which was unusual. As I approached on foot, staying in the shadows of the tree line, I noted that every window in the great house blazed with light, dozens of candles burning in each room, making it look like a fortress against the gathering darkness. I found a servant's entrance unlocked and, God forgive me for trespassing, made my way inside. The lower halls were empty, though I could hear activity from the kitchens, the clatter of dishes and the shouted orders of what I assumed was the cook. Following the sound of voices, I climbed a narrow staircase that opened onto a balcony overlooking the great hall. There, hidden behind heavy velvet curtains, I witnessed something I still struggle to understand. The hall had been changed. The usual furniture had been removed and replaced by a single long table covered in black cloth. On this were 6 silver cups, a black candle at the head, and what appeared to be an ancient book bound in dark leather. At exactly 6 o'clock, as the last natural light faded from the high windows, the family entered in a line. First came Lord Edmund, not in his usual fine suit, but in a robe of deep red. He was followed by Lady Karen in white, her face hidden behind a veil. Behind them came Sebastian and Imogen, dressed the same way, and finally Victor and Eleanor Hallowgrave. They arranged themselves around the table, with husbands and wives standing across from each other rather than side by side. Lord Edmund spoke in a language I didn't recognize. Not Latin or Greek, but something older with harsh sounds that seemed to echo strangely in the hall. When he finished, each person took up one of the silver cups and drank. What happened next makes no sense. The three women, Karen, Imogen, and Eleanor, each walked around the table until they stood before a husband who was not their own. Lady Karen positioned herself before Sebastian, Imogen before Victor, and Eleanor before Lord Edmund. Lord Edmund spoke again in that strange language, and then, to my shock, each man took the hand of the woman now before him and spoke what sounded like wedding vows. The women responded the same way, though I noticed that while Imogen and Eleanor spoke clearly, Lady Karen's voice shook, and twice she stopped, only continuing after a sharp look from Lord Edmund. The ceremony ended with each newly formed pair drinking from a shared cup. As they did so, I saw the candle at the head of the table flare impossibly high, casting monster-like shadows on the walls. For a moment, though I think this was due to the strain on my mind, these shadows seemed to move on their own, twisting into horrible shapes before settling back. The entire thing lasted less than an hour. When it was over, the newly paired couples left the hall together, Lord Edmund with Eleanor, Sebastian with Karen, and Victor with Imogen. Their faces were serious, except for Victor, who wore a smile I can only describe as predatory as he led the clearly unwilling Imogen away. I remained frozen in my hiding place long after they had gone, trying to make sense of what I had seen. Was this some bizarre family tradition, a twisted game among the decadent rich, or something more sinister? I was brought back to reality by a sound behind me. Turning, I found myself face to face with Mr. Finch, the butler. I expected alarm or anger at finding an intruder, but his expression held only resignation. "You should not have come here tonight, Doctor," he said quietly. "What happens at the Solstice is family business." "What I witnessed was not merely family business," I protested. "It appeared to be some form of wife exchange. Surely this is not legal or moral." Finch's face remained blank. "The Hallowgraves follow older laws than those of England, sir. It has been this way for generations. It will continue to be so." "But why?" I demanded. "What purpose does such a practice serve?" For a moment, something like fear flickered across the butler's calm features. "Keeps the darkness at bay, sir. Now, I suggest you leave before you're discovered. The family would not take kindly to your presence here tonight." He escorted me to the servants' entrance where I had entered and practically pushed me out into the cold night. As I made my way back down the hill toward the village, I glanced back at Ravenscroft Hall. In an upper window, I saw a pale face watching Lady Karen, now bound to Sebastian for the coming year. Even at a distance, her despair was clear. What have I stumbled upon in this remote corner of England? And more importantly, what should I do with this knowledge? Blackwood's diary entries in the following weeks detail his attempts to understand what he had witnessed. He searched the village's small library for information on the Hallowgrave family history, talked with the elderly pastor who proved evasive, and carefully watched the behavior of the family when they appeared in the village. His entry from January 9, 1888, notes, "The new arrangements within the Hallowgrave family appear to be public knowledge within Thornwick Hollow, though never openly discussed. Today I saw Lady Karen at the fabric shop, accompanied not by Lord Edmund, but by his brother, Sebastian. They behaved as any married couple might, Sebastian choosing fabrics while Karen gave her opinion. What struck me was the reaction of the shopkeeper. No surprise, no outrage at this apparent impropriety. It was as if the winter solstice had legitimately transformed these relationships in the eyes of the community. More disturbing still was my encounter with Lord Edmund and Eleanor later the same day. They came out of the post office as I was passing. Eleanor, previously Victor's wife, now clung to Edmund's arm with an intimacy that suggested their new relationship was not merely for show. The change in her behavior since December was remarkable. She seemed younger, more alive, while Lord Edmund himself appeared somehow diminished. When they noticed me, Lord Edmund nodded in acknowledgement. "Ah, Dr. Blackwood, I trust you're finding our little community to your liking." There was something in his tone that suggested he knew of my presence at Ravenscroft on the solstice night. Before I could respond, Eleanor spoke, her voice carrying an undercurrent of warning. "We're so fortunate to have a man of science among us now," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Though some matters in Thornwick Hollow transcend scientific understanding. Isn't that right, my dear?" "Indeed," Lord Edmund replied. "Some traditions are better respected than questioned, Doctor, for everyone's sake." The threat was unmistakable. As they walked away, I noticed Lord Edmund's hand at the small of Eleanor's back, possessive, controlling. She leaned into his touch like a flower seeking the sun. Yet there was something unsettling in her eagerness, almost as if she were drawing something from him through that simple contact. Throughout January and February, Blackwood continued his investigations carefully. He discovered that the Hallowgrave tradition of spouse exchange at the winter solstice dated back at least 200 years, possibly longer. The villagers accepted it as part of the natural order, like the changing of seasons. More interesting were the patterns he began to notice. Each exchange seemed to follow specific rules. The oldest brother always took the youngest wife, the youngest brother the eldest wife, and so on. And with each passing month, certain physical changes became apparent in the newly formed couples. From his entry dated March 15, 1888, I can no longer attribute the transformations to my imagination. Those who have taken younger spouses seem to be growing younger themselves, their skin more supple, their step lighter. Conversely, those with older partners appear to be aging at an accelerated rate. Sebastian, now paired with the youthful Karen, has lost the stoop in his shoulders that was so pronounced in December. His hair, previously gray at the temples, now shows no trace of silver. By contrast, Karen herself seems to be withering. Her once lustrous hair is now dull, with dark circles permanently etched beneath her eyes. The most dramatic change is in Victor and Imagigen. Victor, previously robust and red-cheeked, now moves like a man 20 years his senior. Imagigen, however, glows with vitality. I observed her in the village square yesterday, laughing with an abandon that bordered on madness as she purchased ribbons and lace from the clothing seller. These physical changes defy medical explanation, yet they are consistent with certain esoteric theories regarding the transference of life energy between individuals. Could this be the purpose of the solstice ceremony, a vampiric ritual disguised as a marital exchange? As spring arrived in Thornwick Hollow, Blackwood's diary shows, he had begun to earn the trust of certain members of the household staff at Ravenscroft Hall. A young maid named Jenny provided him with valuable insights into the daily life of the family under their unusual arrangements. From his entry dated April 23, 1888, Jenny confirms what I have suspected. The exchange of spouses is no mere ceremony or social arrangement. The couples truly live as husband and wife in every sense. More disturbingly, she reports that the family maintains detailed records of these exchanges dating back generations, preserved in a locked room in the oldest part of Ravenscroft. According to Jenny, this room, referred to by the servants as the binding chamber, is only accessed by the head of the family, currently Lord Edmund. She described strange sounds coming from behind its iron-bound door on nights when the moon is new, a sort of whispering, she said, but not like any human voice I've ever heard. When I pressed her about the physical changes in the family members, she crossed herself and whispered, "It's the feeding, sir. Some take, some give, but there's always a balance." Before I could question her further, she was called away. I slipped her a few coins and arranged to meet again next week. There is something here beyond superstition or eccentric family tradition, something that may border on the supernatural, loath as I am to entertain such notions. Blackwood's next entry described his secret meeting with Jenny, but it held a note of frustration. The girl had been vague and frightened, constantly looking over her shoulder as they spoke behind the village church. She provided few new details, only repeating that the balance must be maintained, and that terrible things had happened when previous generations had attempted to break the cycle. However, His patience was rewarded in early June when he made contact with another source within the household, an elderly groundskeeper named Silas, who had served the Hallowgrave family for over 50 years. June 12, 1888. Silas proved far more forthcoming than Jenny, perhaps because his advanced age leaves him with little to fear from the family's displeasure. We met under cover of the orchard at the edge of the Ravenscroft grounds, where he shared a tale that chilled me despite the warm evening. The Hallowgrave tradition, according to Silas, began in 1666, a year already infamous for calamity. The family patriarch at that time was one Matthias Hallowgrave, a scholar with interests in alchemy and astrology. During his travels on the continent, Matthias acquired a book of ancient origin, the same black tome I observed at the Solstice ceremony. This book, Silas told me, contained rituals and incantations from before Christian times, old magic, dangerous magic. But Matthias was ambitious and saw in these pages a path to power and longevity. On the winter solstice of 1666, Matthias gathered his extended family, brothers, cousins, and their wives at Ravenscroft for what he claimed would be a celebration. Instead, he enacted a ritual from the book, binding the family members to entities Silas would only refer to as the others. These others, Silas said, his voice dropping to a whisper. They exist alongside us unseen. They crave human experiences, love, desire, fear, but can only access them through willing hosts. The ritual created a symbiotic relationship between the Hallowgrave family and these entities. Each year at the winter solstice, the others would facilitate the exchange of spouses, allowing them to experience new emotional connections and physical sensations through their human hosts. It's a feeding, Silas explained, echoing Jenny's words. The others feed on the emotions, the lust, the jealousy, the attachment, and in return, they grant certain benefits. What kind of benefits? I asked. Silas looked around nervously before continuing. Life, Dr. Blackwood. Extended life, health, influence. The Hallowgraves who participate in the cycle live far beyond natural years, though they age and rejuvenate with the exchanges. Lord Edmund himself is over 90, though he appears no more than 50. I must have looked skeptical, for Silas added, check the parish records if you don't believe me. But there's a price for this unnatural extension. If the cycle is broken, if the exchange doesn't occur even once, the others take back all they've given, and more besides. What happens then? I asked. The old man's face creased with genuine fear. It happened once in 1788. The family tried to end the practice. The head at that time was a pious man who saw the exchanges as sinful. He burned the book, or tried to. By the following morning, every member of the household was found dead, their bodies twisted as if in terrible pain, their faces frozen in expressions of such horror that the first maid to discover them went mad from the sight. Except one survived, Silas continued, a distant cousin who had been away during the attempted rebellion. He returned, recovered the book which had refused to burn, and reinstated the tradition at the next solstice. The family has kept to the bargain faithfully ever since. Throughout the summer and autumn of 1888, Blackwood's journal entries tracked the continuing transformations among the Hallowgrave couples. By September, the patterns were undeniable. Those who had taken younger partners at the solstice had themselves grown younger in appearance, while those with older spouses showed signs of accelerated aging. Most concerning to Blackwood was the deterioration in Lady Karen's condition. Once vibrant and beautiful despite her melancholy, she now appeared gaunt and listless. Sebastian, by contrast, had never looked better, his previously scholarly stoop replaced by confident posture, his complexion healthy, his eyes bright. October 3, 1888. I encountered Lady Karen at the apothecary today. She was purchasing laudanum in quantities that suggest either severe physical pain or an attempt to escape her reality through sedation. When she saw me, she dropped her gaze immediately, but not before I glimpsed the desperation in her eyes. Lady Hallowgrave, I said, using her formal title despite her current arrangement with Sebastian. I couldn't help but notice you seem unwell. As a physician, I must express concern. She glanced nervously toward the door before responding in a whisper. Takes more from me each time, Doctor. I don't think I'll survive another exchange. Before I could inquire further, Sebastian entered the shop. The transformation in Lady Karen was immediate and disturbing, her shoulders squared, her expression becoming a mask of contentment that never reached her eyes. "Darling," Sebastian said, though the endearment sounded hollow. "Are you keeping the good doctor from his duties?" "Not at all," I interjected. "We were just discussing the changing seasons and their effect on one's health." Sebastian's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. Indeed, the approach of winter brings many changes, some welcome, some necessary. He placed a possessive hand on Karen's waist, and I observed a barely perceptible flinch from her. As they left the shop, I noticed something I had missed initially: a thin silver bracelet around Karen's wrist, etched with symbols similar to those I had glimpsed in the Black Book during the Solstice ceremony. Sebastian wore a matching one. The apothecary, Mr. Willis, must have noted my interest. "All the Hallowgrave wives wear them," he said quietly. "And the husbands, too. Been that way for generations." "What are they for?" I asked. Willis shook his head. "Best not to ask, Doctor. Best not to know." As November arrived and the days grew shorter, tension in Thornwick Hollow increased noticeably. The villagers, aware of the approaching solstice and the changes it would bring to the Hallowgrave household, went about their business with forced normalcy that barely concealed their unease. Blackwood noted in his journal that preparations at Ravenscroft Hall had begun for the coming ceremony. Deliveries of unusual items, rare herbs, unidentifiable metals, casks of wine from vineyards that had ceased production decades earlier, arrived with increasing frequency. Meanwhile, the physical transformations among the family members had reached their extremes. Lord Edmund, paired with the youngest wife, Eleanor, for nearly a year, now appeared almost youthful, while Eleanor herself had aged dramatically. Her once auburn hair streaked with gray, lines etching themselves deeply around her eyes and mouth. Victor, the eldest of the cousins, had become almost skeletal in his thinness, while Imagigen bloomed with unnatural vitality. Only Sebastian and Karen's transformation remained incomplete, Sebastian growing stronger while Karen weakened, but neither reaching the dramatic extremes of the other couples. November 28, 1888. Jenny sought me out today, her usual caution abandoned in favor of urgent fear. Lady Karen, she informed me, had attempted to flee Ravenscroft in the night. She had made it as far as the village border when Sebastian found her, seemingly aware of her movements despite the secrecy of her departure. "It was like he could sense where she was, sir," Jenny said. "He went straight to her. No searching, no asking after her. Just walked right to the spot where she was hiding in the old mill." According to Jenny, Sebastian returned Karen to Ravenscroft without force or argument. There was no need. Once he placed his hands on her shoulders, Karen became docile, following him back to the hall like a sleepwalker. "It's the bracelets," Jenny whispered. "They bind them together. None can remove them but the head of the family, and only at the solstice." I asked what would happen to Lady Karen now that she had attempted escape. Jenny's expression was grim. "They'll watch her closer, but the true punishment will come at the exchange. Lord Edmund will pair her with Victor next. It's how they discipline those who resist. 1 year with Victor is like 3 with any other." The implication was clear. Victor, as the most senior of the cousins, would drain more of Karen's vitality than Sebastian had. It was, in effect, a death sentence spread over 12 months. As December arrived, Blackwood became increasingly concerned for Lady Karen's welfare. His journal entries show his internal struggle, the rational physician battling with a growing belief in the supernatural explanation for the Hallowgraves condition. December 10, 1888. I have made a decision that may cost me my position in this village, possibly my reputation in the medical community, and perhaps even my life, if the Hallowgraves truly possess the influence I now suspect they do. I cannot stand by and watch Lady Karen be sacrificed in this vampiric ritual. Tomorrow I will approach her with an offer of escape. I have arranged for a carriage to be waiting at the crossroads 3 miles south of the village on the night of the 19th, 2 days before the solstice. I have funds enough to see her to London and contacts there who can help her disappear among the masses of that great city. The question of the bracelet remains problematic. If, as Jenny suggests, it creates some form of psychic link between Karen and Sebastian, removal may prove impossible without Lord Edmund's intervention. Yet there must be a way to shield its effects, at least temporarily. I have consulted discreetly with Mr. Willis about metals that might interfere with spiritual energies. Though clearly uncomfortable with my inquiry, he suggested lead might provide some barrier. I have fashioned a simple lead cuff that could be worn over the silver bracelet, hopefully blocking whatever influence it exerts. Blackwood's plan to help Lady Karen escape was set in motion on December 15th, when he was summoned to Ravenscroft Hall to treat a kitchen maid for burns. While there, he managed to pass a note to Karen, arranging to meet her in the village church the following afternoon. December 16, 1888. Lady Karen arrived at St. Michael's shortly after 3, when the winter sun was already low in the sky. She wore a plain dress and cloak that would not draw attention, though her distinctive Hallowgrave bracelet gleamed at her wrist. She appeared startled when I emerged from the shadows of the nave, as if expecting someone else. "Dr. Blackwood," she whispered. "Have you truly found a way?" I explained my plan, the waiting carriage, the route to London, the new identity she could assume there. She listened with increasing hope until I mentioned the lead cuff I had brought to shield the bracelet's influence. "It won't work," she said, her voice hollow. "Others have tried similar methods. The binding is not physical, not entirely. It's in the blood, in the soul, if such a thing exists." "Then what can be done?" I asked. Karen glanced toward the altar before responding. "There is one possibility, though it carries great risk. The book, the one used in the ceremony, contains not only the ritual of binding, but also methods of breaking such bonds. If it could be obtained, studied before the solstice." "Where is this book kept?" I asked. "In the binding chamber, locked away except during the ceremony itself." She hesitated before adding, "But there is a time when it's vulnerable. On the eve of the solstice, Lord Edmund brings it to the great hall to prepare. The family retires early that night to be ready for the ceremony. There would be perhaps an hour when the book lies unattended." It was a desperate plan, fraught with danger. Yet the alternative, leaving Karen to her fate, was unthinkable. "I'll do it," I said. "I'll retrieve the book on Solstice Eve. But you must be ready to flee immediately thereafter. If there is indeed a way to break the binding, we may have very little time to implement it before its absence is discovered." As we finalized our arrangements, the church door creaked open. We froze, but it was only old Mrs. Tanner come to arrange flowers for Sunday service. Nevertheless, our meeting had lasted long enough. With a final promise to meet on the night of the 20th, we parted ways. As I watched Karen hurry back toward Ravenscroft, a sense of foreboding settled over me. Was I saving her from a terrible fate, or dragging us both into something darker still? The days leading up to the winter solstice passed with agonizing slowness for Blackwood. He made discreet preparations for Lady Karen's escape while maintaining his normal routine to avoid suspicion. His journal entries during this period are tersely focused, primarily on practical matters rather than his usual philosophical musings. December 20th, 1888, Solstice Eve. All is prepared. I have told Mrs. Pembroke that I am traveling to the neighboring village tonight to attend a serious case, ensuring my absence will not raise immediate alarm. The carriage is arranged, waiting at the crossroads as planned. I have packed only essential medical supplies and enough money to see Karen to safety. As dusk approached, I made my way toward Ravenscroft by a roundabout route, avoiding the main road. The weather has turned in our favor. A heavy mist has descended, obscuring visibility and muffling sound. I reached the hall just as the last light faded from the sky. As Karen had predicted, the servants' entrance was left unguarded during the dinner hour. I slipped inside, finding the narrow corridors deserted as the staff attended to the family's meal. Making my way to the gallery overlooking the great hall, I concealed myself in the same spot I had used nearly a year ago to witness the exchange ceremony. Below, The hall was partially prepared for tomorrow's ritual. The long black-draped table stood ready, the 6 silver cups gleaming in the candlelight, and there, at the head of the table, lay the book, its black leather binding seeming to absorb rather than reflect the light around it. I waited, watching as servants entered periodically to adjust candles or add wood to the fire. Finally, around 8 o'clock, Lord Edmund himself entered. He approached the book, running his hands over its cover in what appeared to be a gesture of reverence. Then, to my surprise, he spoke aloud as if addressing someone unseen. "Another year completed," he said. "The bargain maintained. Tomorrow we renew our covenant. As always." He fell silent as if listening to a response I could not hear. After a moment he nodded. "Yes, the young one, Karen. She has learned her lesson, I think. Victor will help her understand the importance of acceptance." Another pause, longer this time. Lord Edmund's expression darkened. "Impossible. The cycle cannot be broken. Not without consequences we cannot bear. You know this. We all know this." Whatever unheard voice he was responding to seemed to have concluded the conversation. Lord Edmund straightened, smoothed his jacket, and exited the hall, leaving the book unattended as Karen had predicted. I waited 5 minutes to ensure he would not return, then descended to the hall. Approaching the book, I felt a strange reluctance to touch it, an almost physical pressure pushing against my outstretched hand. Overcoming this sensation took more willpower than I care to admit. The tome was heavier than its size suggested, and cold to the touch despite the warmth of the hall. I opened it carefully, finding pages of vellum covered in script unlike any I had seen before. Not quite runic, not quite hieroglyphic, yet somehow readable to my mind, if not my eyes. I turned the pages, searching for anything that might relate to breaking the binding Karen had described. Near the center of the book, I found an illustration of the silver bracelets worn by the family members. The text surrounding it seemed to describe their function, something about tethering the essence and maintaining the flow. Further on, I discovered what appeared to be a counter-ritual, a complex procedure involving specific star alignments, rare materials, and blood from both bound parties. It would be impossible to perform before the solstice, requiring preparations we did not have time to make. But there was something else, a simpler method, though with a dire warning attached. The text suggested that if a bracelet were removed by force rather than ritual, the binding would indeed break, but the accumulated energy of the exchange would discharge violently. Both parties would immediately revert to their true conditions, the taker losing all they had gained, the giver regaining what had been taken. For those who had participated in many exchanges over decades, like Lord Edmund, this reversion would mean sudden rapid aging, perhaps even death. I was so absorbed in my discovery that I failed to notice the hall door opening. It was only a slight change in the air, a draft that disturbed the candle flames, that alerted me to another presence. I looked up to find Mr. Finch regarding me with an expression of profound disappointment. "I warned you, Dr. Blackwood. Family business should remain so." Behind him stood Sebastian Hallowgrave, his eyes fixed on the book in my hands. The physician fancies himself a scholar of the old ways. Finch. How presumptuous. I closed the book, my mind racing. I was merely curious about the family's traditions. Professional interest, you understand. Sebastian's smile was cold. "Of course. And I suppose your arranged meeting with my current wife was also professional in nature? A consultation, perhaps?" He knew. Somehow he knew everything. The bracelet, I realized. It didn't just bind Karen to him physically but allowed him to sense her thoughts, her plans. "Where is Lady Karen now?" I demanded. "Safe," Sebastian replied. "Preparing for tomorrow's ceremony as we all should be. She will join Victor for the coming year as planned. A difficult but necessary lesson for her." "And what of me?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Sebastian stepped aside, gesturing to the hall door. "You will join us for dinner, Doctor. Lord Edmund wishes to speak with you regarding your curiosity." I considered making a break for the servant's entrance, but Finch seemed to anticipate this thought, positioning himself to block that escape. With no viable alternative, I allowed myself to be escorted from the hall, the book left behind on the black-draped table. The journal abruptly ends at this point, the remaining pages torn out. However, among the papers I acquired was a separate document, a letter addressed to Blackwood's colleague in London, dated January 3, 1889, but apparently never sent. It provides a chilling conclusion to the events at Ravenscroft Hall. My dear Harrison, if you are reading this, then I have succeeded in having this letter delivered to you posthumously, as arranged with my solicitor. The events I am about to relate will strain credulity, yet I swear on all I hold sacred that they are true. Following my discovery in the great hall of Ravenscroft, I was brought to dine with the Hallowgrave family. All 6 of them were seated around a table as if for a normal meal, though the atmosphere was anything but normal. I was placed between Imogen and Eleanor, directly across from Lord Edmund, who regarded me with cold calculation throughout the first courses. It was only after the servants had been dismissed that he spoke of why I had been brought there. "You've taken quite an interest in our family traditions, Dr. Blackwood," he said, swirling wine in his glass. "Most outsiders find them curious, but know better than to interfere." "I am a man of science," I replied, trying to maintain my composure. "Unusual phenomena naturally attract my attention." "Science," Lord Edmund repeated with a small smile. "I wonder what your scientific mind makes of the fact that I was born in 1792, or that Sebastian there saw the Battle of Waterloo with his own eyes." I looked around the table at these people who appeared no more than middle-aged yet claimed to have lived for generations. Their expressions, amused, condescending, predatory, suggested they expected disbelief. "The book," I said instead. "It allows you to extend your lives through some sort of energy transfer, taking vitality from your exchanged spouses." Victor laughed, a harsh sound. "Clever doctor. Yes, we take, but we also give. It's a cycle, you see. 1 year I age rapidly, the next I rejuvenate. Balance is maintained. Except for those new to the cycle," I countered, thinking of Karen's deterioration. "They only give, never receive." "Until they've completed enough cycles," Sebastian interjected. "Karen is still in her first 7-year round. Once complete, she'll take her turn as receiver. It's perfectly equitable, given time." "If she survives," I said. A silence fell over the table. Lord Edmund set down his glass with deliberate care. "That," he said quietly, "is the risk we all accepted when we joined this family. The first cycle is difficult, but those who endure emerge stronger. Their lifespans extended far beyond natural limits. A fair exchange, wouldn't you agree? And if they didn't choose this? If they married into the family unaware?" Eleanor laughed, the sound brittle. "None come to the Hallowgraves truly unaware, Doctor. There are always rumors, warnings, but the allure of wealth, position, and eventually long life proves too tempting. I knew what awaited me when I accepted Victor's proposal, as did Imogen, as did Karen. I thought of Karen's desperation, her attempt to flee. Yet some regret their choice. Regret is a luxury we cannot afford," Lord Edmund said. "The bargain was made long ago by Matthias Hallowgrave. We are all bound to it, willing or not. To break the cycle would mean—" He was interrupted by a commotion from outside the dining room. The door burst open and Lady Karen stumbled in, her dress torn, her face streaked with tears. Behind her, Mr. Finch looked apologetic. "She overpowered the maid, my lord," he explained, "struck her with a hairbrush and ran." Karen's wild gaze found me. "You have to help me," she pleaded. "Tomorrow they'll bind me to Victor. I won't survive it. Not in my condition." Sebastian rose, reaching for her, but she shrank back. "Don't touch me. I know what you've taken from me, what all of you take." Lord Edmund remained seated, his expression one of tired patience. "Karen, my dear, this hysteria is unbecoming. Return to your room and prepare for tomorrow's ceremony." "No," she cried. "I won't do it again. I refuse." A change came over Lord Edmund's face, a hardening, a coldness that seemed to drop the temperature in the room. "You have no choice. None of us do. The bargain must be kept." What happened next occurred with such speed that even now I struggle to recall the exact sequence. Karen lunged across the table, seizing a knife from Lord Edmund's place setting. Before anyone could react, she had pressed the blade not against him, but against her own bracelet-bound wrist. "If I die, the cycle breaks," she shouted. "For my link in the chain, at least." Sebastian moved toward her, his hand outstretched. "Karen, don't. You don't understand what will happen if—" But it was too late. With a single desperate slash, Karen severed not her wrist, but the silver bracelet itself. It fell to the floor with a musical chime that seemed to hang in the air unnaturally. The effect was immediate and horrifying. Sebastian collapsed as if struck, a terrible cry escaping his lips. Before our eyes, his appearance began to change. The vigor and youth he had accumulated over the year draining away like water. His hair whitened, his skin wrinkled and sagged, his body seeming to shrink within his suddenly ill-fitting clothes. Simultaneously, Karen underwent a reverse transformation. Color flooded back to her cheeks. Her posture straightened. Her eyes cleared of the perpetual exhaustion that had clouded them. She looked down at her restored self in wonder. But the changes did not stop with this pair. As if a chain reaction had been triggered, Lord Edmund began to age as well, followed by Victor and then the others. It was as if whatever force had preserved them for unnaturally long lives was now extracting payment all at once. "The others," Lord Edmund gasped, his voice now that of a very old man. "They're taking it all back." The candles in the dining room flared impossibly high, then extinguished themselves, plunging us into darkness broken only by moonlight through the windows. In this ghostly illumination, I witnessed shapes forming in the shadows, tall, spindly figures that seemed to bend at impossible angles. They had no distinct features I could discern, yet somehow conveyed a terrible hunger. These entities, the others, that Silas had spoken of, moved among the Hallowgraves, reaching out with limbs that were more suggestion than substance. Where they touched, the aging accelerated. Lord Edmund was the first to fall, his body crumbling like ancient parchment until nothing remained but dust and empty clothes. In the chaos, I grabbed Karen's hand and pulled her toward the door. We fled through the darkened corridors of Ravenscroft, the sounds of the family's destruction echoing behind us. Servants ran in the opposite direction toward the dining room, their faces masks of terror. We reached the main entrance and burst out into the winter night. The grounds of Ravenscroft were transformed. The carefully maintained gardens now overgrown, the trees twisted into unnatural shapes that reached toward us like grasping hands. The very house itself seemed to be changing, portions of it aging and crumbling before our eyes. We did not stop running until we reached the village, where we found similar chaos. The bargain that had kept Thornwick Hollow prosperous, for the village too had benefited from its association with the unnatural longevity of the Hallowgraves, was broken. Buildings aged decades in minutes, wood rotting, stone cracking, thatch collapsing. The villagers themselves were spared the rapid aging that consumed the Hallowgrave family, but their expressions as they emerged from their homes told of suddenly broken enchantments, of memories returning, of a fog lifting from their minds. Many looked toward Ravenscroft with expressions of dawning horror, as if truly seeing it for the first time. Karen and I did not linger. We took the carriage I had arranged and fled that very night, not stopping until we reached London 2 days later. I have secured lodgings for her with a distant relation of mine who asks no questions about her past. As for myself, I find I cannot return to my practice. Not after what I have witnessed. Some knowledge changes a man forever. I write this account not knowing if I will have the courage to send it. Even now, miles and weeks removed from Thornwick Hollow, I feel watched. Shadows in my room seem deeper than they should be. And sometimes, from the corner of my eye, I glimpse spindly figures that vanish when I turn to look directly. Karen feels it too. The others, she believes, are not finished with us. We broke their bargain, disrupted their feeding cycle that had sustained them for centuries. Such entities, she insists, do not forgive. If you receive this letter, it means my premonition was correct. Investigate my death if you wish, but do not seek out Thornwick Hollow. And above all, Do not search for the black book that bound the Hallowgraves to their terrible tradition. Some knowledge is better left undiscovered, some bargains better left unmade. Your friend, Thomas Blackwood. The journal and letter were not the only items in the collection I purchased. There was also a newspaper clipping dated January 15, 1889, reporting the mysterious destruction of a village in northern England. Thornwick Hollow was described as having been abandoned after a catastrophic structural collapse affected nearly every building simultaneously. The few survivors reported a sudden acceleration of decay that could not be explained by natural causes. More intriguing still was a small silver fragment I found wrapped in cloth at the bottom of the box, a piece of what appears to be a bracelet, etched with symbols that match no known language or runic system. I have kept it locked away, unwilling to touch it directly. Of Thomas Blackwood himself, there is one final record, a death certificate dated February 7, 1889. The cause of death is listed as heart failure, but a note in the corner, barely legible, reads, "Patient found in state of extreme age despite being only 43 years. Of Lady Karen, there is no further trace in any official record I can find. It is as if she vanished completely after reaching London with Dr. Blackwood. Perhaps she changed her name, built a new life far from the shadow of Ravenscroft Hall. Or perhaps the others found her too. As for Ravenscroft Hall itself, the estate where the Hallowgrave family practiced their dark tradition for over 2 centuries, the land remains abandoned to this day. Local authorities have blocked numerous attempts to develop the property, citing structural instability and environmental concerns. Those who live in neighboring villages tell different stories. They speak of unnatural cold that persists even in summer, of shadows that move against the light, of whispers in an ancient tongue carried on the wind when the winter solstice approaches. Most telling of all, no one goes near the ruins after dark. No one dares disturb whatever might still linger there, waiting for new vessels, new experiences, new bargains to be struck. For some traditions, once begun, never truly end. They merely hibernate, waiting for the next family desperate or ambitious enough to enter into covenant with entities that exist alongside us, unseen but ever hungry. So if you find yourself invited to a remote estate around the winter solstice, pay careful attention to the family dynamics of your hosts. Watch for silver bracelets that catch the light strangely. Notice who seems unnaturally youthful and who appears to be aging before their time. And if by chance you encounter a black book bound in leather that seems to absorb the light around it, leave it where it lies. Some knowledge comes at too high a price. Some bargains, once made, can never truly be broken, not without consequences that echo across generations. This has been the tale of the cursed winter ritual. Sleep well if you can.